Defining and assigning user workflow. User workflow allows you to assign screen sequences to a user based on the encounter type to mirror the interaction with the patient for that specific visit. Typically, the screens that a nurse, for instance, or a medical assistant needs to go through will vary from what a doctor needs to go through. For example, when a medical assistant is doing the patient intake, she might be going through vitals, history of present illness, face sheet items such as allergies, current medications, and past medical history. And then when the doctor comes into the room, he might review that information, but then he actually does the review of systems, physical examination, and then ultimately would do the evaluation and management, assessment and plan, and close the encounter. And then if there's orders involved, maybe the orders would involve going to the prescription, lab or radiology order, specialty procedures, or if you're using the order sheet in your office. So that's just a few examples as to where the workflow arrows could come into play. And the way the workflow is implemented so that all these pieces come together, the advantages are going to be to save you keystrokes and mouse clicks. There's a real-time update of data as you're going through the workflow so that you're not having to individually stop and save your data as you go. And then it can be customized, as I mentioned, per visit type. And then once you have created these workflows, it's individualized per user so that each nurse, each MA, each provider can have their own customized workflows based on what they do in the practice. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Prognosis. I am logged in here as an administrator, you'll notice, and we're going to go under the Settings Configuration menu. First, we're going to create our workflow, then we're going to assign it. So under our configuration menu here, I'm going to go to the Workflow column, and I'm going to choose Workflow Definition. Now, your library may come with preloaded workflows that are based on standard practices, but of course, you can always change these or create your own. So we're just going to go ahead and click the Add New button, and we're going to create a medical assistant workflow. In the middle of my screen, under the Events section, I have a plus sign, and our workflow event search allows us to search for different screens that we want to assign in our workflow. The order that they are chosen will be the default order that they appear for your user, but as you see here in the background, we can resequence them after the fact. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose a few screens that a medical assistant typically would access. Let's say she's going to go into her allergies, current medication, past medical history, and then maybe she's going to do vitals and HPI. Just your standard patient intake. So once I save this, I now have created a workflow called Medical Assistant Office Visit, sequencing starting with the allergies, going to current medications, medical history, vitals, and then HPI. Let's say that your MAs actually start with vitals, so we want that to be first. Once I've saved it, I simply select it and then click the Move Up button, and it will resequence one position at a time. So now that I've done vitals, maybe next I'm going to evaluate their chief complaint. So I want to move my HPI up as well. And then we're going to go through allergies, medications, and medical history. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So it's that simple. You simply name it, and then you add the screens that you want. So now that we have a workflow, we can assign it. I'm just going to go back here to my configuration. And again, we mentioned in the overview that you can assign it either at an encounter type level or at a medic or user level. So first, we're going to look at the encounter type. Over here on the clinic column, we're going to go down to our encounter types. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up the one here called Office Visit. And notice within my encounter type setup, I have a workflow designation which defaults to not applicable. In my drop-down pick list, I will see all of the workflows that I have created. We see those standard ones that we saw already in the library, and now I've got the one I just created called Medical Assistant Office Visit. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose that workflow and save it. Now this is simply a system default for users who are eligible for using workflow when they're on an encounter, but do not have a personal workflow assigned to them at the medic level. This is the easiest way for you to assign a workflow in the practice if everybody is going to follow the same screen sequencing. However, oftentimes a medical assistant or a nurse will have different responsibilities on an encounter than the provider does. If you are going to have different workflows, then that is when we go into the user profiles, which is under our medic column. For instance, here I'll just open up the provider and we'll choose Dr. Cooper. And notice here within my user profile, I do have a workflow button. When I click that workflow button, it brings up a table of all applicable encounter types. So even within the individual user, he or she can have different workflows per encounter type. So for instance, a new patient has a new patient doctor workflow because it probably includes a full workup, a full review of systems, physical exam, and so on. But maybe a follow-up visit for a doctor will not require all of those screens. He may simply go right to the procedure screen, for instance, or go right to the assessment and plan if it's just a follow-up. That is where you might want to come into customizing workflows based on encounter type. So whichever way it works best for you, once the screen sequencing has been defined, you can assign it at the individual user level through the workflow button, and that will then override the default at the encounter type level. Now, as far as workflow being available to users, there is a system property. And again, this would require administrator access. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up so that you see it. And it is called Workflow Applicable For. And notice how we've assigned doctor, nurse, staff. If you need to assign medical assistants, administratives, you can also add those into the property. The value that you assign in this property corresponds to the medic type where the user profile is generated. So unless that medic type is defined under the property, even though you've defined workflows, the user is not going to have the workflow on their login. And now I'm going to go ahead and log in as a user who has workflow assigned. I'm going to log in as our nurse Penny so that you see what the workflow looks like for a user in the system. I'm just going to go ahead and open up Sherry Paltrow, and we'll start with our vitals. And notice down here in the lower right, we have a green arrow. This is the workflow. Since we started with vitals and we defined that as our first screen in the office visit workflow, you'll notice in the lower left, there is no arrow. In the lower right, there is. That means we are on the first screen within our workflow. And we can go ahead and start entering values. And then instead of having to click save and then choose our next option, we can simply click the green arrow. And now as we advance in our screen sequencing, since we have not chosen an HPI yet, it's automatically prompting us to do so. And now you'll notice in the lower left, we can back up to our vitals if needed. And when we do that, you're going to see that our vitals were saved. And now if we advance back to HPI, you will see that our abdominal pain was also saved because we had chosen it. So that again is where you're saving your keystrokes and your mouse clicks, because it's real-time update as you're advancing through your screens. And if there's nothing to update and you're just reviewing it because it's copied forward from a previous visit, then it's just simply clicking that workflow to go to the next button. And based on the screen sequencing that you've defined, you're only going to see the applicable screens that you need to document that visit. So in review, workflow definition allows you to set the screen sequencing for clinical documentation. Once you've defined it, you can assign a workflow either at the encounter type level, which will become the system default for users who do not have personal workflows, or you can assign it at the user level, which will then supersede the system default for that specific user and that specific encounter type. All medic types who are defined at the system level property will have workflow arrows enabled when they are logged into the system. The workflow is displayed and navigated through green arrows on the encounter screen, and it will automatically update each screen as the user navigates through the encounter. That concludes this video within the series. Please click the appropriate link below for your next step. If you'd like to take a quiz, you will receive your results in real time directly on the screen so that you can see how well you've done. If you answer incorrectly, the system will prompt you with the correct response. In addition, a confidential email will be sent to the education team to help us better serve you with our educational offerings. Second, advance to the next video within the series you're currently in. And finally, return to the video library main page. As always, feel free to contact us through the Resource Center or email with any additional questions or comments.